Today I want to bring you an interview that I thought had something really important in it. And this is Professor Thomas Housen from UNISA being interviewed by Sakina Kamwindo, who some of you might remember from SAFM. Back in the day, she used to run many interviews with many people, talk shows, etc. And now she's on national TV and she's interviewing Professor Thomas Housen, and he reveals a couple of things that I've spoken about before. He specifically speaks about Cyril Ramaphosa's CR17 campaign and how the EU and the UK raised lots of money for him to win that campaign, thinking that he would do certain things for him. Now, he speaks of these things on a very superficial level, but Sakina Kamwindo really digs in. And she asks how we can trust the president of the country, or even maybe the next president of the country, if Cyril Ramaphosa is asked to step down by the African National Congress, when he's at the moment Deputy President Paul Mashatile should take over, whether these same people from outside the country that have not been elected could also literally fund Paul Mashatile and influence him, so that they make decisions that are good for the EU, good for the US, good for the United Kingdom. And certainly this is something I've spoken about at length. So without further ado, here is this interview. Please watch it from beginning to end and then share this on all your social media platforms.
Well, thanks for staying with us here on Morning Live. Now, international law professor at UNISA, Professor Andre Thomas Housen, says that President Cyril Ramaphosa has reached a dead end in his presidency. Now, the professor echoes the views of those who question whether Ramaphosa will step down in the course of this year. And pondering the changes to his cabinet and on the South African posts overall, Ramaphosa has been questioned, and Thomas Housen quotes businessman Patrice Motsepe, who said yesterday that only the recruitment of the best managers available globally and an upcoming, uncompromising war on corruption can actually save South Africa's key industries. Now, his assessment is that this wisdom is far from being internalized by the ANC's political elite. A German attorney and professor international emeritus of international law at UNISA, Professor Andre Thomas Housen, joins us now to talk more on these views that he expressed. Professor, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live once again.
Yes, good morning. Thank you.
So first off, you actually captioned it quite interestingly, South Africa post Ramaphosa. So what inspired those thoughts?
Well, it is mainly the reactions of our main trading partners that are amply represented here in South Africa through their embassies, and of course also the reaction of the international media. The guru of all stock exchange analyses, the Financial Times in London, just published 2 days ago a totally devastating article on the misgovernance of all state-owned enterprises and the abysmal bad performance of the South African economy. We've lost nearly 2% of GDP, a downturn that is dramatic and that is completely in contrast to GDP growth in our region, in our neighboring countries, and worldwide. After COVID, economies have recovered, except in South Africa. So there are major concerns. To simplify the statistics, basically half our adult population does not have employment and has no chance of ever finding employment. So they live from one day to the other, praying and hoping that they can find food the next day. This is unsustainable in any country in the world. We are expecting, I believe on the 20th of this month, a national shutdown as announced by the EFF. And many are asking, is Ramaphosa going to cling on? Is he going to survive this shutdown and possibly renewed massive violence and destruction of property? So yes, post Ramaphosa, the speculations are there, and people are hoping that the now appointed Deputy President Paul Mashatile will be more energetic. He will not come in front of viewers on TV looking tired, depressed, and having trouble actually formulating his words. Ramaphosa's performance before with the announcement of the new ministers was probably his worst.
So, interestingly, in that article, Professor Thomas Housen, your opening words were that Ramaphosa, the dream candidate of the EU in 2017, has reached his sell-by date. So, he was the dream candidate. Why?
Because he was believed to be a successful businessman. People didn't look exactly at the performance of his businesses. They didn't realize what role he played in the downturn of Lonmin, where a share price of maybe £10 fell to 10 pence. They didn't look at Chanduka. They didn't look at actual performance. They were hoping that a pragmatist, in a way a social democrat, would tame the transformation energy of the ANC, would tame the leanings towards a very radical economic transformation, which, according to the EFF, should follow the model of Venezuela. And South Africa, according to the EFF, should have a president like Hugo Chavez. So that was the hope. That's why the West supported very strongly the Ramaphosa candidature, even financially. A lot of money was raised in London to help him win the nomination at the ANC conference at the time. But he hasn't fulfilled the promises. The Eskom situation, the power situation, has got worse. The national railways during his term were destroyed. There are basically no more national railways. Petrosa is as bankrupt as Eskom. And so we can carry on. The state-owned enterprises are ruined. Of course, Minister Pravin Gordhan should be probably the first one to answer for that. But strangely, he was not replaced. He is retained together with the pillars of the old ANC, like Minister Mantashe, like Minister Kelly, and quite a few others. Even Dlamini Zuma is still around. At the age of 74, she's now Minister of Youth. This is in a way, like a bad joke. And so the renewal of the leadership has not taken place, and with that, the rand will fall further. Confidence in South Africa's future performance will not be good.
So what you say is very interesting, Professor Thomas Housen, because if you consider that the ANC was still, very firmly in charge of the government in 2017, they didn't look as though they would lose power at that point. They were still going to be very much in control and leading government. It would be ANC policy, one would imagine, that the European Union should have been concerned about as opposed to the actual candidate. So when you say that there was an expectation that Cyril Ramaphosa would actually tame the transformation agenda within the ANC, what does that mean? And how is that in the interest of South Africans as opposed to the interest of Europe?
Well, European policy will look after its own interests, and there are trading interests. There are very, very significant and large investments from Europe in this country. Europe and the US continue to be the main investors and the main employers in South Africa. So obviously they will try and avoid or counter the trends in a party that would call for the nationalization of banks or nationalization of industries, or implement what has been found to be unsustainable worldwide since the demise of the Soviet Union. Soviet Union didn't fall because America was so strong and evil. It fell because its economic system had failed. So the command economic approaches they're out. They're completely dated. China will be the first one to lecture South Africa that if you nationalize your agricultural industries, you will face massive famines, as China experienced in the 1950s. So what is in the interest of South Africans? Of course, that's for South African voters to choose and decide. I believe that it is not in the interest of South Africa to see a continuing decline of GDP. GDP per capita and year at the time of transition in '94 stood very close to Turkey's level at about $12,000 per capita and year. And we're now half. We're now $6,800 per capita and year. So over 30 years, South Africa has become impoverished, and poverty has become worse. And the desperation of people that aren't fortunate as we are here on our TV screens and cameras with Wi-Fi and with backup power, solar panels or generators, the great mass of the South African people actually deserve better.
Indeed, they do. But do you not think the continued interference of countries in the West, Europe, the United States, as you mentioned, a lot of money was raised in London to support Cyril Ramaphosa's candidature. Surely that was not for nothing. It was so that you are backing someone who would then basically be at the forefront of promoting Europe's position and their foreign policy position on what South Africa ought to be doing, as opposed to what may be best for South Africans. And, do you not think that is problematic, Professor?
Well, you put it, you put your finger on the wound. Yes, of course. Our friends in Europe have not always served this country well. Let us go to the original sin of the ANC, which was the arms deal. Europe basically bribed South African decision makers to agree to purchase systems that were totally unsuitable to our environment and that are now unserviceable. Of the 3 frigates, only 1 can run. Of the 3 submarines, none is serviceable. Most of the helicopters are unserviceable. The fighter jets, I think only 2 are running out of 19 purchased. These were systems that we couldn't maintain, that we didn't have the money to service, and that had requirements, skills requirements that this country could not fulfill. So, and we carried on with the energy transition, while about 60% of the global warming goes on the account of the United States and Europe, and our contribution here in South Africa is a mere 2%. We were forced, we were pushed, our politicians were basically bribed with enormous promises and large amounts of money to switch out perfectly well-functioning power stations and to throw this country into an energy emergency. This was actually not our making. So yes, the interests of Europe and the interests of the United States aren't always coinciding with the need for South Africans to see progress and to develop and to have better opportunities. But then it is for politicians who take on the role of leaders to weigh these things, to be steadfast, to make choices and to be courageous. So also courageous against their own party. Big leaders in the past, like de Gaulle or Adenauer, they would just tell the party to shut up or fire me. And they were leaders. So they built an enormously strong Europe together, sometimes against the wishes of the parties. So we do have a leadership failure, I would say, and it has to do also with age. I'm 71, and I wouldn't take on a huge responsibility anymore, because simply physically at 71, you don't have the strength to do that anymore. We do not need geriatric politicians. We need the next generation to come in. And this is why I'm very happy that we have Paul Mashatile now in line.
And I would naturally be skeptical once again, if the European leaders, like they did with Cyril Ramaphosa in 2017, come up and say, well, we now endorse Paul Mashatile, because then we have to ask how much money are they raising for him in order to influence him, in order to take certain decisions in their best interest once more. But equally, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, is 80 years old. So apart from, a few smatterings of young politicians leading powerful nations, it seems that we are firmly set in geriatric politics, as you put it, Professor.
Well, I agree. I don't think we would have this horrendous war, this horrendous conflict between Russia and Ukraine, where probably about 400,000 soldiers are dead by now. If we didn't have an American president who shows all the signs of an uncompromising and vindictive old man, who also doesn't have to fear the future because he has no more future. Maybe he has another year or 2 or 3, or I hope for him 10 years to live, but he knows he doesn't have to answer future generations. So whatever decisions he takes, it is actually dangerous. He could say, I'm going to be gone anyway, so I'm going to throw those nuclear bombs just to be on the right, just to win. So we should actually have laws in the constitutions barring access to office to people over 70, and I am over 70. So,
okay.
But I think we have to realize that there's a time in life when you can reflect, you can analyze, you can still work, but you shouldn't have a job that actually requires 14 to 16 hours a day of 100% concentration, hands-on, good judgment. And we see with the Ramaphosa team, the good judgment is missing.
Right.
We are probably the only country in the world that has these blackouts. These are not, power stations are not like flying to the moon. They're not complicated.
And just a final one. We are out of time. So very briefly, Professor, will President Cyril Ramaphosa, in your view, make it to the end of this year as President of South Africa, or at very least to the next general election as President of this country, do you think?
The entire opposition believes that we will have to resign. He will be forced to resign before the end of this year and possibly in the next few months. The legal issues surrounding Falafala are getting more severe and more difficult. It may be in his best interest not to wait for a vote of no confidence in Parliament if he loses the support of the party. The first step to solve a problem is to admit that there's a problem instead of denying it. And at the moment, I think the current executive is still in a denial phase. They think, it's not so bad. We have lights in our offices. What are people talking about?
Okay.
But people are losing their jobs every day.
Professor, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for that engagement. German attorney and Professor International Emeritus of International Law at UNISA, Professor Andre Thomas Housen. He penned a piece on President Cyril Ramaphosa, whom he says has reached the end of his presidency. And he says that it's questioned whether Ramaphosa will actually step down during the course of this year, as you heard him more pointedly saying he would probably have to resign. So let us know your thoughts at Morning Live SABC.